This video is going to be 10 things that you didn't know about minor league baseball. And so a lot of high school players and the vast majority of college players, a lot of their dream is to play in professional baseball. And so you kind of conjure up a lot of different visions of what that'll look like for you because you think it's what you want to do, but in reality there's a lot of differences once you actually get there. And so I was a ninth round pick in 2021, and I'm in the Cubs organization right now, but this is just going to be kind of a look into like 10 things that you probably wouldn't know if you were an average fan or like a high school baseball player aspiring to play pro baseball. Number one is that wins and losses actually do not matter that much, especially at the lower levels in most organizations. And so what I mean by that is not that the coaches and the staff and the organization doesn't want you to win, but there's things that they value a lot more importantly than if you win the game. So like each organization has KPIs, which are basically their key performance indicators, and they have like certain ones for each level, but then they also have certain goals for each player. And so in a perfect world for an organization, they're winning games and their players are hitting those KPIs. But they'll be much more happy if the players are hitting those KPIs and they're losing games, vice versa if like they're winning a ton of games but all their players aren't hitting those development goals. And the reason why that is a thing is because most organizations have basically ways they can like predict how good you'll be in the big leagues based off of like certain numbers that don't necessarily correlate to you winning minor league baseball games. Examples of these things could be like fastball velocity for pitchers or movement on a certain breaking pitch. For hitters, it could be exit velocity. Like they'll be way more satisfied if a hitter is hitting balls over 100 in the air, but he's like only hitting 200 because he's not getting very lucky right now in a small sample size, than if he was like getting a bunch of flares and he's like hitting 400. Like they'll be able to realize that that's gonna recorrect, just based on that's how the way baseball is. There's a lot of variance in it. This differs a ton from college because in college at the highest levels it's all about winning games and not so much about development, just because the coaches have their jobs on the line. All right, number two is going to be prospect status and how you're viewed within an organization. So organizations have basically like certain players that they're really expecting to help the big league club. And so if you're one of those players that have been deemed that because you've earned it, you've shown some type of skill that they really value, then you're going to have like infinitely more leeway with how you perform, even off-field stuff like that, and they'll kind of, your path to the big leagues will be a little bit more catered and guided, and you'll be like pushed that way. You almost might be challenged where someone else might have to like overperform to get that same opportunity. And like this is kind of, you find this in pretty much every field. Like there's going to be certain players or employees that are kind of like, the head person thinks very highly of them and they see stuff in them that they're really going to want to see through, and as a result they're going to have a few more opportunities, and then there's other people where like they probably don't expect them to contribute at the big leagues, but we still have people at the big leagues that were in that box, so they just have to prove the organization, and prove to the people who make the decisions that they can contribute at the highest level, and then they'll be given their shot as well. Another thing is coordinators. So each organization has pitching and hitting coordinators, and at least for the Cubs, they'll drop in at different affiliates throughout the year at different times, and just kind of check in on how the players are doing. But it definitely kind of changes the dynamic, because sometimes you'll be at an affiliate, you have a great routine, and then like you have coordinators coming to town, and it's like, oh, like obviously these people are here, they're watching you anyway, even when they're not there. But when they're there, it does kind of change the dynamic of how you go about your business in a sense, and something that you don't really experience at any other level of baseball until you get to professional baseball. Like in college, you don't have like someone that you don't see randomly just come in and like change the dynamic. Like everyone that's making the decisions is always there with them. So you get like a certain comfortability factor in college, and obviously in high school it's like you don't really have that. But yeah, in pro ball you have coordinators that come in periodically, and they're there to help you too. They're there to like work on stuff with you, provide resources, and maybe a different take on something that you're trying to figure out. So trades. Everyone loves to talk about trades. The trade deadline is actually coming up. Trades are honestly a fascinating part of minor league baseball in the sense that the player really doesn't know a lot of the time until it happens. So like one of my buddies was playing in Double A with a team, and he had just got called up, and like the first day he was there was two of their guys got traded and they left in the third inning and we're gone. Like a lot of times you don't get to say bye to a lot of the people. It's just a very quick thing, and unless you're like tipped off by your agent or some other source, which isn't normally the case, it just happens, and then now suddenly you're across the country in a completely different organization with no one like that you knew from your first organization, and it happens in less than 24 hours. So those are kind of one of the most interesting parts of minor league baseball, because that is really not a thing that you see in pretty much any other field where you can just, it'd be like if you were working a corporate job and then suddenly you're at 2 o'clock, your boss tells you, yeah, you're going across the country, you're going to go work for these guys in a completely different area with different people. Like, so that's definitely something that is a pretty unique part of the game, and a lot of people don't know exactly how those go down. For transportation, on road trips, we have 2 different buses, one for pitchers and one for position players, which is pretty cool. So you always have your own spot, there's plenty of room, and those are often at different times depending on the schedule. But something that I didn't have in college, I don't know if different college teams have had that, but probably something that you only really get in pro ball, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't even a thing until a few years ago, even in pro ball, that pitchers and position players had their own buses. But definitely a cool feature, and allows for the road trips to be more comfortable and everyone to have their space. All right, so time at the field. You are at the field for a minimum of like 7 hours a day. We have one off day on Mondays. So a lot of times you're at the field for up to like 10 hours a day. It's like, how is that possible? We're not doing stuff for 10 hours, but say you have a game at 7 and you're on the road, depending on how your organization runs it, but a lot of times you'll play catch, 4 hours before the game if you're a relief pitcher or if you're not the starting pitcher for that day. So you're getting to the field at like 1 for a stretch at like 2:30, maybe 3, and the game doesn't start till 7. The game's about 2.5 hours, 3 hours. Bus is not going to leave right after the game. It's going to leave 45 minutes after the game. Say the game ends at 9:30, bus is at like 10:20. So now you're at the field from basically like 12:30, 1 to 10:30. And a lot of fans and normal people think that like you kind of just show up to the ballpark an hour or 2 before the game, kind of when the fans are showing up, but there's a lot more to it. A lot more stuff that goes into the daily work that kind of does take up a lot of the day. And if you weren't on the inside of it, you would not quite realize how much volume of time is spent at the field. So that's why it's important to kind of figure out a routine of things you want to do at the field, because you do have a lot of downtime as well. But you're going to be there quite a bit. All right, the next one is going to be brand deals. So obviously all the cleat manufacturers, gloves, whatever you can think of that you're going to wear, that isn't actually your team uniform. There's dozens of different brands that make those products, and if you're highly touted enough, or you're able to have a deal through some sort of means with one of those brands, a lot of times, depending on what the contract says, you have to wear, like if you have a Mizuno deal, you have to wear Mizuno batting gloves and Mizuno cleats, and if you don't wear them and like someone sees that, like you'll get contacted by that brand and get kind of like reprimanded almost in a sense, and told that, hey, like you need to wear our product, which is definitely cool to have a brand deal, but interesting how like you have to wear that specific thing, and sometimes maybe you realize that that's not exactly the cleat you wanted to wear, or the gloves don't feel right, but if you don't wear those, you're gonna have some explaining to do to that brand after. So that's an interesting little niche inside of pro ball. A funny tidbit on that: when I was at Oregon State playing, we had someone who was wearing like an Adidas Oregon State is a Nike school, to preface. Someone was wearing an Adidas pullover, but it was Oregon State somehow, something like that. Maybe it was just a black and orange Adidas jacket, but Nike was like watching the game. It was just a random regular season game. Somehow they got tipped off to that and like told the player to go change into a Nike or like team issued thing, which is pretty interesting. It was just like the fifth inning of a game in April. It wasn't like a College World Series game or a huge playoff game, but the people are watching out there. Last one is going to be per diem. This is pretty common in college, but in pro ball, before you go on a road trip, you are given an allotment of money for meals and just to be able to DoorDash or do whatever you want on the road for meals that aren't provided by the team. And so that allotment of money, the way the Cubs do it, is just given to you on a team card that is issued to every player, and it's just like a normal bank card, but they do it to where they can just deposit money on it whatever they want, and that allows you to easily access your per diem for the week and use it how you see fit and make sure that you're getting enough food and that you're treated right on the road trip. All right, we're getting towards the end of the list here. I think this is probably like 6 or 7, but language barrier. So obviously, the WBC, the World Baseball Classic, happened before this season, and there is talented players from all around the world, and a lot of those players do not speak any English. So even in professional baseball, you have a ton of players that don't speak English, and the organizations do a good job of facilitating like classes and English stuff for the players that don't speak English. But when I first got to pro ball, I remember like my group had like a lot of Latin players that didn't speak English, and I was like, how do I even like say like, hey, do you need someone to play catch with? And it was kind of a little bit of a shock at first, but over time, if you practice it, you'll be able to like develop enough slang to communicate with them. But definitely something you kind of don't think about, and the fact that like maybe even close to 50% of your teammates are not going to be speaking any English, and if they do, it'll just be very limited. But that's the beauty of baseball. It gives everyone around the world an opportunity to play, regardless of where they've come from, if they're talented enough, and if they work hard enough. So something that you really don't experience in college at all if you're playing, at a big school in the United States, but something that you will definitely experience in pro ball, all the way up to the big leagues. All right, the next one is going to be pro scouting. And what that means is different organizations, so this ties into trades, but different organizations have amateur scouting, which is like people for the draft, high school and college, and they have pro scouting. And what pro scouts do is they go around and watch other teams' players and basically build out their database and their reports on them for future reference in trades or at free agency. And so say the Pirates are constantly watching a player who's in the Diamondbacks farm system. By the time he's in AA or AAA, if he's performing well, they have a plethora of information on him from several years that they will use to determine if they want to trade for that player, or like acquire him in the Rule 5 draft and stuff like that. So you're still being scouted even when you're in pro ball. You're just being scouted by other organizations for potential trades down the line or acquisitions in other ways that aren't trades. And this one's going to be a little bit different, but nicotine and caffeine use. You will probably not find many areas where more nicotine or caffeine is consumed than a minor league baseball locker room, because it is, the season is a grind. We play like 130 something games, and legal stimulants are used to the maximum ability, whether it be Zins, other nicotine pouches, coffee, C4, caffeine pills, pre-workout, Monsters, like any type of energy drink. For all you energy drinks out there, you should be looking at minor league teams for sponsors, because that would be a hit. But yeah, nicotine and caffeine use is very prevalent, and that's kind of a thing that is similar in college as well. High school maybe not as much, but definitely in pro ball. Okay, another thing is the development list. So in pro ball, you have your active roster, and then you can put players, you can keep them on the roster. They're not on the active roster, but they're on what's called the development list, which means they're still on the team, but they're not playing in games, and they're working on whatever the org wants them to work on or what they feel they need to work on. So you don't really have that in college, but in pro ball you can put people on that list, and I don't think there's any, like, you can be on that list for as long as the organization deems. But the development list is definitely something that is pretty interesting, and it can be a useful tool because sometimes it's hard to like work on stuff and still be playing in those games. And I think the development list gives the organization a chance to keep you on that roster, still have another player come to like fill your in-game innings while you can still work on stuff outside of the game.